This is a Sunday school class party of my parents. They went to the EUB church in Shelby. There goes Lois and Leona Miller through the archway. There was a friend of my dad's. That's Mr. Baker. You know, I've talked about Mrs. Baker living in Philadelphia. Well, that's her husband, the man playing the guitar. He died in his 40s suddenly. That's Mrs. McKellogg. And that's Mr. and Mrs. Mackey there on the left. Mr. Baker's being silly. There's Mr. Clark. There's Mr. McKellogg. He was a chemist and worked at the Tubby. There's Jack Armstrong. He worked at the Tubby also. Mr. and Mrs. Mackey again. They'd get together on Saturday nights about once a month. Once in a while you could invite your children. This is Mr. Clark again. I can't remember that lady's name. That's Mrs. Payne, Phyllis Payne. Mrs. Armstrong and Mr. Van Osdale. He was the choir director at church. That's Mrs. Clark. Many of these people have died by now, of course. Mr. Payne, that's Karen, holding one of the Van Osdale children. There's me and my glasses. By this time I have glasses. That's Mr. and Mrs. Solinger. I believe they've both died now. It's Mr. and Mrs. McKellogg again. They had twin boys. Really sweet people. Just wonderful people. They look a little strange right at this point, but really they weren't this strange most of the time.